Welcome to the Waters of the Sea Stories. I hope everyone is doing well tonight. My name is Tracy Ferdine. I'm the director of the Center for Global Environmental Education, and I'm so pleased and proud to be able to say that we are in a new year, and we have an exciting presentation tonight about some of our best friends in some pretty unique areas from a Minnesota point of view that we get to travel to. So let's get started. We are celebrating over 31 years as a center. Our university was formed in 1854, 168 years ago. I had to revise my script, 168 years ago. And we are very proud of the fact that the first two graduates of Hammond University were the Soren sisters, who went on to be some of the first educators in the territory of Minnesota. So the Hamlin was formed before Minnesota became a state. Our center is called the Center for Global Environmental Education. Our mission is to foster environmental literacy and stewardship in citizens of all ages. And we are built on four cornerstones: professional development for teachers, multimedia tools, K-12 curriculum, and community outreach. So we believe that through interdisciplinary lenses of arts and science, we can come together to accomplish great things for our society and the environment. But enough with the official introduction. I am really excited tonight because we have some really fun friends, interesting friends that have done some really neat things. And one of the great parts about my job is that I get to travel around the country, and we've spent a lot of time down in New Orleans and a lot of time in Hawaii. And there is a lot of difference between those two areas, but we also found some very similarities. The people are very open and friendly. There is environmental issues. One thing I was kind of surprised to find is that there are wetlands, not so much in the Delta, but in Hawaii. And there are endangered wetlands, there's endangered wildlife and waterfowl. But what's also exciting is that there are some incredibly passionate people that are working on their own and through their organizations to preserve that area. So we thought it'd be kind of fun to compare and contrast, look at these two men's work where they have been really engaging in a pretty unique and powerful opportunity. So we are looking at some of the similarities and the differences between wetland restoration in the Mississippi River and in the Hanalei River and other parts of Kauai. So with that, I am going to introduce. We'll kind of do some checking here. Please keep your mic on mute if you can. Use the chat to ask questions. I will be recording those along with Sarah, and we are going to take questions after all the presentations have gone through. We find that's a nice way to do that too. So put those in the chat, and I will write them down, and we'll get back to them. You certainly can have your video on if you would like. It's always nice to see people's faces a little bit. And the other component is that we record these webinars, and we'll get a link out to you in a couple weeks. So with that, I think we'll start to introduce our team. I have to chuckle. Blaise and Chad are the kind of guys that if you're kind of in the back roads, they're the kind of guys you want to have with you because they seem to get the job done. Blaise is the Coastal Environmental Program Manager with the Moreau Foundation. The Moreau Foundation, its mission is to improve the quality of life in St. Bernard Parish with the lands as our primary asset for the effecting change. They've done a lot of work in that parish, and they have been a great supporter of our program with our Waters to the Sea project, and they're funders of this project tonight as well. Blaise has joined the Moreau Foundation several years ago as the Coastal and Environmental Program Manager, and has been doing a lot of wide-ranging activities, which he will start to tell us about. And it's just great to be a friend of Blaise. I don't know Chad as well. We were fortunate enough last year to engage with him as we were doing filming and storytelling of the Kauai National Wildlife Refuge Complex. And I've got to read his bio that they sent us because I just love it. So Chad grew up as a biologist's son in Washington, duck hunting and restoring wetlands as a child. He ran away from Washington and moved to Hawaii, where he had a unique opportunity to figure out wetland systems in Hawaii. Under the tutelage of Leigh H. Frederickson, he created the Hawaii Handbook for Wetland Management, Currently, he works at Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge. I believe that's in Oregon, but I'm not 100% sure, but back on the mainland as an engineering equipment operator with a degree from the School of Hard Knocks and tractor driving. Now, it was Duck Fart University to begin with, but I edited that because I couldn't say duck fart on this webinar. But what I like about that is that Chad really was an observer. We teach inquiry. He observed what was going on. He was in tune, and he's really done some incredible and pioneering work in wetland management in a semi-tropical environment. And we're going to hear all about that. And I like it. He said, yeah, I want to make it interactive, but I want the kids to drive a tractor. And I'm thinking, that's pretty cool. And to wrap up, John Shepard, our associate producer and associate professor and producer of our multimedia tools, always shares a little bit of some of the interactives that we have made. And we've got a lot of good stuff about the Delta. And Chad, I don't think you've even seen some of the new things that we've created for the interactive for Hanalei River. So we'll get a chance to explore those two components. So I am going to turn this over to our team, and I think you're going to really enjoy looking at this. And I'm really excited to see the different questions we get about these two different ecosystems. Anything else that I should talk about? And thank you, Sarah, for pulling this together once again. But otherwise, I think we can get started. Blaise, you're going to take it off to begin with?
Sure. All right. So Tracy said, yeah, I'm Blaise Pezold. I work for the Mira Foundation. We are a private family foundation in St. Bernard Parish, southwest of the city in New Orleans. We own somewhere over 26,000 acres outside of the levee and a lot of acres inside the levee. And like you were saying, that's our biggest asset. And my job's hard to explain. We have 4 pillars for the Mira Foundation. There's the environment, old people, young people, and education. I usually try to hit the environment, education, and young people in most of the projects that I do. So what you're going to see is a good deal of that mixed into what I work on a daily basis. But I could end up, taking the trash out after a festival, filling cages with rocks. Every day is something different in the job that I do. But this talk is about 4 different projects that I've done. Some of them I was with the Mira Foundation, some of them not, but there's a whole lot of contrast that I have in this presentation. So this is intentional plantings for coastal restoration. So fluvial patterns, rivers, they start in headlands or mountain ranges, or they start in a place like Lake Itasca, something similar to this, and they have tributaries that come into a main channel. And as that main channel,
hey Blaise,
yes.
Remember to share your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Give me a second. Well, that's embarrassing.
No worries. No worries. You had everybody hanging on your every word.
We've all done it, Blaise.
Yeah, it was pretty seamless.
I knew exactly what you were talking about.
The good thing is I didn't get that far. Thanks for stopping me, because I'd have just kept rolling with it. All right. Do y'all see the little panel on the side, or is that just blocking on my screen?
No, I don't.
It's just a screen.
Excellent. Okay, so your tributaries, they start up in your headlands here in a mountain range or rolling hills. A place like Itasca would be here. Those tributaries come into a main channel. That main channel eventually hits an area where there's a lot less drop, and gravity isn't as big a fact. Well, it's still a factor, but there's not as much relief. And the river will slow down. It'll start making these S curves. I planted like a couple hundred trees today, so I'm a little worn out. But so if I sound tired, that's what's going on. But it'll make these large S curves, and then eventually it forms a delta. Most deltas don't look like this with these 4 channels. Usually they'll have one dominant channel and a couple other smaller channels that are at one point were the dominant, and then the river had switched. But this is a really good diagram to kind of explain how things work. You can see the meandering patterns in this and how they'll change course. These are splays and crevasses, and these kind of fill in areas that are lower. And you know, a river channel is always looking for the area that's lower and the easier path to the sea, and that's why you get all these fluvial patterns. And down in New Orleans here, this is basically what we live on, are distributary channels or former distributary channels, because those create high ground. And so as these distributary channels flood out over the marsh or the swamp or the wetlands, their sediment, the larger particles of sediment fall out right at the edge, and this forms the high ground or ridge areas, and that's what the city of New Orleans was founded on. That's where we live here in St. Bernard Parish. Everything is based right around this. So this project, you can see on my little map I made where it is, down here in the southeast corner. The city of New Orleans is up here. St. Bernard is over here, and this is down in Lower Plaquemines. And this part of the river here, it doesn't have a levee. So this is the west side. The west side has a levee, but the east side of the river has no real levee. They had one at one point. It's degraded. They don't worry about it, and they took down other parts of it. And this is what you call a spillway, where the river can go unobstructed to the sea. Because everywhere else along here, all the way up to, well, even up in places like South Dakota, you have levees along the river trying to keep it in its banks. Same for the Red River where it comes in here, and same for the Atchafalaya that comes down this way. I just want to note that if we did not have levees, the Mississippi River would be coming out here in Atchafalaya Bay. But there's 2 places in Louisiana where we're gaining ground. Most of Louisiana, we're losing our wetlands at an extremely rapid rate. But those 2 places, they're Atchafalaya Bay and the Wax Lake Delta down here, and then over here in the spillway where the river is unencumbered. And so this project was a Quipper proposal that me and an old friend that's now at Tulane, well, he's now at the University of North Carolina or Duke or some North Carolina university, but he was at Tulane at the time. He approached me about a working group where we talked about, well, let me back up. The state of Louisiana is working on 2 large-scale river diversions here on the west side, near Myrtle Grove, and then over here on the east side, north of Phoenix. And those would be massive structures that allow the land to flood and the river to work like it once did, or similar to what it once did. But what we were thinking about in this working group is what does the future hold with this, and how do we work and look at flow dynamics in the river and how best to capture that sediment. So if we had gone back to that picture where we saw the banks of the bayou and they're accumulating sediment really quickly there, what is the best apparatus to form land as quick as possible? So we put in this proposal through the USDA and through a federal program called LA 39 QUIPRA. This was the Water Institute of the Gulf, which my friend Chris Esposito worked for, and then and he worked for Tulane also at the time. and then he brought in a scientist that looks at flow dynamics through vegetation from MIT, and she actually models all of those with plastics and in little like flow chambers and all. But so we partnered on this project. We got the funding for it. We're still in the planning phase, but the basic premise here is this: we're testing out this T formation to form deltas, but then also allow flow through to form a secondary delta behind it here. So the idea of the T is the water goes in between the T's, and then this backstop here basically makes it accumulate in a triangular pattern on these T's while still leaving an open channel to distribute to this area behind it. It's something we're looking at. A lot of the science around this is never been thought through and developed, and so we're just trying out basically a different shape to trap sediment. If you look over here, they did triangles to trap it. It was successful, but it does have some issues with it. And that was done with sediment, but this is what we're talking is with vegetation, which vegetation is always a cheaper option than moving actual sediment yourself. And then these 5 dots across here, these are square blocks of and the vegetation we're using here is cut grass, which is a relative of wild rice. And what we're looking at is our spacing on these 5 blocks. So the first one would have 1 foot spacing. They're 1 foot apart. The second one would be 2 feet apart, 3 feet, 4 feet, and 5 feet. And that's an important thing to know, because you know, if this is a delta and say the T doesn't work, or we don't want to use the T and we just want to do a grid pattern across here, what is the spacing? Can you put them 5 feet apart and it still builds land? Or does it have to be 2 feet apart and it's really not going to be an economically effective project? Or does it even need to happen at all? And so that's what we're kind of playing with down here. So multiple lines of defense. After Hurricane Katrina, walloped the city of New Orleans, a bunch of university folks got together in a big auditorium and sat down and came up with the multiple lines of defense as basically a concept on how to not let Katrina happen again. And the idea is to use natural obstructions and man-made obstructions in order to stop storm surge from hitting people's houses and infrastructure inside of the city and the surrounding countryside of New Orleans, or of southeast Louisiana. So if you look here, you have they have the offshore shelf. I'm not sure about that one, but Barrier Islands, you have the Sound, you have marsh, ridges, and then you have man-made stuff like elevating your houses and highways and floodgates and levees and pumps and elevating houses. And then the last form is evacuation. What we're going to be focusing on today, I added these two. This is oyster reefs and mangroves. So oyster reefs and mangroves have occurred in South Louisiana for a lot farther back than I originally had known, but they're here. They seem to be kind of traveling north. You can kind of put that together on why that's happening. And oyster reefs, they have been here historically, but in South Louisiana, that's a commodity. And so we've kind of pillaged our old natural reefs that were there, and we've laid them out in more of a farming system across the bottom. And so we don't have that natural barrier of oyster reefs in front of our marshes at this point. So, but back to the mangroves. So there was a fisherman down here, a fly fisherman, who approached parish government and started asking them about black mangroves, and did they, do anything with them, and are they growing them out with kids? And he had this whole idea of growing them out with high schoolers. They contacted me, and I've been working with them and through the foundation for a couple of years now. What we do, we go out to Gardner Island, south of town, and we pick these little yellow beans. These are called propagules. They look kind of like a fava bean, and we put them in a bucket, and the water opens them up. And then with a bunch of high schooler kids, these aren't high schoolers. With a bunch of high schooler kids, we go pot them in these cylindrical pots, and then keep them wet for about 1.5 years. And then with the sheriff's office and the coastal department here, and the 4-H kids from Chalmette High, we go and plant out in the marsh. So this is a little busy, but this is artificial oyster reefs that the state has started to build down here to protect our marsh. You know, on a marsh edge of a bay. This is Bay Elwha, Eloi, if you want to look it up on Google Maps. So Bay Elwha is kind of open to the Gulf. There is a barrier island that's way really far off from it, and so there's a very large amount of wave action that hits the edge of this. And our first planting was this little kind of teal color right here, and we planted and we came back, I think 6 months later, and the shoreline, we had either a tropical storm or a hurricane, and the shoreline was missing about 30 feet of it, and all of our plants were gone. So y'all give me 1 second. So that first year was a total wash. So the second year we went in here to Bayou La Loutre and we planted this huge grid here. And what we found out was this north end of the grid actually was a little bit lower and it flooded often, but this higher end that was actually closer to where we had originally planted was flourishing and growing at a much faster rate than where it was constantly flooded. So from this, we deduced that it was good to be along this marsh edge because it had a little bit more height to it, and was better drained, and the trees would grow faster. So we came over here to Mosquito Bite on the other end of Bay Elwha, and we got behind the oyster reefs that the state had built. And we planted this little green area here, and we went from, the edge right next to the water up where it was highest, and then down and sloped into where it was lowest and more flooded. And what we found was that they liked that higher edge right on that edge, and we got kind of a general idea of we just wanted to kind of ring the edge there. And so this last year we went and did all of this. In the fisherman that we worked with, he went and he's got a nonprofit called ABLE, Anglers Bettering Louisiana Estuaries. They went and got a NOAA grant to go and plant all the rest of this with some extra smooth cordgrass and a whole bunch more mangroves. So these are two of the multiple lines of defense, and that probably should be added to that diagram. This is the oyster reef that protects the mangroves, and then these mangroves will grow to 8 to 10 feet high and make a kind of it's not an impenetrable wall, but man, it is a lot of friction out there, and it's one other thing between that storm surge getting farther into our fishing communities or our highways that lead down to the coast. And it's a really good program, and I think that one of the best things about it is we integrate kids into our students. So fetch, I was kind of alluding to fetch earlier across that bay. It's wind blows water, and the water starts to make waves, and those waves crash on the shore, and that's the one of the larger forms of erosion we have down here. and you can see its effects here. This is all dead marsh on the edge here. And another thing with fetch, as that wind is coming across, as it hits an area that is more shallow, the waves get higher. So you wouldn't really think that. You would think like, oh, these huge waves that come out of the deep, but you know, they essentially when they hit the shallow area, that's what makes them big. And they can be really destructive. So this whole project was an issue with fetch and kind of our it's kind of funny. This actually has multiple lines of defense. So you have a levee across here, you have a canal and a pump house, you have a rail line, you have an old dump, and then you have natural bayous and natural marsh and a little bit of marsh here. And then this down here, this is the intercoastal waterway. I think that goes from Maine to Mexico. And then you have natural marsh out in front of it right here. So this is what I like to call wetlands in a box. And these are different units within the Bayou Sauvage National Wildlife Refuge. I want to say it's the only urban wildlife refuge in the US. And it was actually destined to become a suburb or like a suburban build. And I guess the guy who was building houses ran out of money, and then he gave it to the US government. Or at least that's the story I've heard. But it's broken up into these different units that have different hydrology, and this is Bayou Gentilly. I need to note there's gravity drainage right here that leads into this canal and then can eventually be pumped out. But so the whole thing is kind of like a big pond that drains right here. And this is an old pump that used to work when that bayou was still there. And then there's a pump here that used to work as well. Both of those are non-operational. So I was brought out here by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This part down here used to be a rookery. There used to be a whole bunch of trees, and birds would nest in there. And Katrina's storm surge went over the levee into this, and it had an inundation of salt and killed all the trees. And at the same time, we figured this out after kind of looking at it, it suffers from fetch, and because of this long area across here. So I go to look at this as far as rehabbing for a rookery. I walk out from here and I walk like hundreds of feet out, and it's not over the top of my boot, which is like, that's my general measurement of like, oh, if it's around a foot deep. And so hundreds of feet out, and it's walkable. So, and it had a nice like sand composition, and it's essentially what I would call this a Goldilocks site. Everything is right in it because you can walk out on it. It's a very fresh system, so you can use bulrush and cut grass, which will grow 6 to 8 feet high. And those are really aggressive, robust plants that come in our ecosystem and will take over an area, and they'll also stop fetch from happening. So I knew and this was before that other project that I showed you through Quipper. I knew I could rehab this whole thing. The program that I was working under at the time, we probably could have done this in a year, and then we'd have to do this, and we would have worked out here for like 15 years trying to do this one project. So I approached the folks at the USDA, and we put together another proposal. And the way we would build something like this is, what is this, 26? This is 2016 imagery. So we went probably pre-Katrina, pre-Hurricane Katrina. Here you can see the dump is open then, it's closed at this point. And we were looking, where was the old shoreline? Where, what are the lines we want to work off? Here's the old bayou. that used to empty, and I think it either connected in with this or this one over here. And that's actually Bayou Gentili, and it went up here. So and then we went and we ran surveys across here trying to see what the depths were, and we came up with this kind of thing. And the idea here was protect this bottom in this very long expanse. And you're gonna, we did double rows and doubles of double rows across there. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife, like their name says, they're worried about wildlife. They're worried about birds coming and using the space. Where can they get like a protected spot out of the wind, if they're migrating south? Can we create a pond in here that will create submersed aquatic vegetation, or SAV, that they can eat? So, you're thinking food and shelter, and that's what these big kind of ponds are that we built out of rows of vegetation. And this is the finished project up here on the right. We did a couple of block plantings there. Again, we're testing the if you plant a big block of this, does it just grow out? Does it start making these rounded patterns and fill everything in? Or this was all done with bulrush, Shanoplectus californicus. And this was done with bulrush. It kind of tends to stay in its lane. And you can see, this square right here is something right around there. And it'll expand out, but it's not at a very fast rate, but it really will fill in and make a hard line. And that hard line keeps that fetch from hitting here. And so if you look at this picture and you look at the green right there, that's the same green that's right here. And then you look at it now and you see all these kind of brown, they look almost like bubbles forming there. That's those are marsh grasses filling in behind it. Where I had these double rows down here, that's all these. We added a second double row farther out. So there's 3 double rows there. One that's covered up, a second that's now filling in, and it's almost making it out to the third. This is, I want to say that's 685 feet from here to here that it came out to go and meet those areas and fill in. So this is a really cool project. I think it was 30,000 plants total. This is all grown and planted by professionals. It's super precise. You can tell by the lines. If it was volunteers, they'd be all kind of off kilter and not straight. And so we got a couple hundred acres out of this for $300,000. And a couple hundred acres, if we had dredged out of this canal right here, the intercoastal, and pumped it into here to build all this, that'd cost us somewhere near like $30 million. So $300,000 or $30 million to fill that in. I think this is a better use of your tax dollars when I look at this kind of work. So speaking of bad uses of your tax dollars, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, or Mr. Go, the Port of New Orleans built the Industrial Canal, which was an inland port area that was off of the river. And the idea was this is going to be a huge moneymaker. And, it's along the intercoastal. This is the intercoastal waterway. The one I said was, goes all the way to Maine and down to Mexico. So the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet was supposed to be a shortcut for ships that normally would have to go up the river. They could go the straight route and go right into that industrial canal facility. They get put on a rail line and they go straight out of town, or they get put on a truck and they go straight out of town. They built this, they started off by cutting everything down and blowing things up and cutting this really long scar all the way through the middle of St. Bernard Parish. And it had disastrous effects for St. Bernard. Basically, it let the high salinity Gulf waters get all the way into a freshwater wetland. You can see this is a cypress forest at the time. I have friends of mine that are in their 50s that remember this area being a cypress forest. And when I first started doing wetlands work, this would get spikes of 35 parts per thousand. 35 parts per thousand exists out in the Gulf of Mexico. That's really high salty water getting all the way up into here into a freshwater wetland. And it had, I mean, it literally collapsed the areas within here. In 2007, they built a rock dam across here to slow the salinity. Now, if you look, we have a gauge system that we measure our wetlands values with. The parts per thousand here is 6 parts per thousand. On the outside of the rock wall, it's 14 parts per thousand. So that 6 is where bulrush can exist. 14 is way saltier, and then 35, which used to be in here, is way out here again, which is really a good thing. And what we've seen is everything north of this, even as far as Baton Rouge, has started to come back. And we're now, instead of never having a possibility of planting cypress in this low-lying area called the Central Wetlands Unit, now we can plant cypress in there. And that's actually what I was working on today. So this is that Central Wetlands area. This is the Intercoastal. This is the Mr. Go or Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. This is Bayou Bienvenue. This is Bayou Dupree and the Violet Canal. The city of New Orleans is over here to the left. Bayou Gentilly unit was just above the cursor right there. Currently, a lot of the nonprofits that are in South Louisiana that are doing cypress replanting or focusing either where we have an input from the river or areas like this where we have a pump house that is pumping fresh water in there. So a lot of them focus right along the levees because the levees are an easy place to go and put a truck on there and drive it down and get to an area that needs these trees. So they've got this kind of area taken care of, and I'm sure this will be their next target. But what's not getting done are all these outlying bayous. And if we go back to kind of the first project where I was talking about the river and how it deposits, and you think of like these bayous, this is where your higher sediment loads would be at some point, right along the edges of these. It's not going to be back in here. This is where you're going to get ponding and it'll fall apart the fastest. It's going to be along these edges. And so that's where we've been focusing, putting cypress trees. And the other idea of that is, you know, instead of just putting it up here at the top where it's easy, we're getting out there and we're covering a lot of ground. And you know, these are our targets for this year. In future years, we're going to try to get all of these much smaller ones and really get some penetration up into these places, because these are vast areas. It doesn't look like a lot, but you know, this is an oil refinery. This is a very large expanse. So December 15th and 14th, we did this bayou. This is Bayou Ducros, and we started here at the top and went all the way down. I have pictures on the next slide. I'll show you that. And then today we started with this one and we went all the way up into here. And then I want to say Jared got as far as this spot. It's pretty awesome to be able to do that. Much like I was saying earlier, none of the projects I do are me alone. I always have support staff like Max Haynes here of Dockville working with me. We work with other foundations, St. Bernard Wetlands Foundation. This is one of my mentors, Dr. Goyer. This was kind of a dream of his to actually get out. You can see this is a marsh. This is not a swamp anymore. This used to be all cypress trees, and we're actually able to get out there and plant. But we wouldn't be able to do it without our partners like Ag and Forestry and Common Ground, bringing boats. at the St. Bernard Wetlands Foundation brought the trees and the stakes and tree protectors. We're all working towards the same kind of goal of getting these trees out there and kind of affected the landscape in a positive way. It'd be nice if we work kids into this one somehow, but right now we're trying to keep it very low numbers of volunteers and a lot of people that do this very often because we really want to get this off the ground and running. So but yeah, this has always been a dream of Dr. Goyer's and Miss Becky from St. Bernard Wetlands Foundation, and it's awesome to attain it. Today we planted 365. This day, I want to say we did around 450. So I think we're a little bit over 800 for the year so far. And we have a couple more weeks of planting that we're going to be able to do.
Hey, Blaise, I got to jump in here.
Yeah.
Oh, good. There we go. I've got questions. Perfect. I've got the questions that folks put in. So I'll get to those in a little when we're done with the next couple presentations. But we're going to switch over. Thank you, Blaise, so much. Switching over to Chad. Now, I think an interesting part of this is the Mississippi River is 2,500 miles long, and the Hanalei River, I don't know. I don't imagine it's more than 10, maybe not quite even that. So it's a very different scale, but there's so many cool things that are similar. So let's turn this over to Chad, and we're now going to go to the semi-tropical paradise of Hanalei and the island of Kauai.
Does everybody see that?
I can, yes.
Awesome. Okay. So my name is Chad Smith. I was an equipment operator for the Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge System, or Kauai National Wildlife Refuge System. We had 3 refuges: Hanalei, Huia, and Kilauea. So this is where I started as an intern and started getting into wetland management in Hawaii and started learning what I've learned. So this is kind of an overview of maybe a quarter of what I've learned. So here we go. We're going to go quick here. So island of Kauai, if anybody knows where that is, that's the northwesternmost island in the main Hawaiian Islands. And so the Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge is on the north shore, right near Hanalei, the crescent shape of Hanalei. So obviously within the within the Hawaiian archipelago. So you see Midway Atoll and all those other island systems out there. So just to give you an idea where Kauai is, if anybody doesn't know. So we start with this is all about birds pretty much. So bird species like or flightless species like flying species like birds, bats, and large insects were the only successful species aside from plants to reach the Hawaiian Islands and adapt to the unique island habitats. Hawaiian Islands supported 113 species of flightless geese, ibis, rails, and 59 species of honey creepers. So you can kind of see.
Hey, Chad.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're sharing. I see it staying on one screen.
Really? That's not good.
I might be wrong.
You can also go full screen with your PowerPoint, and then we'll be able to see everything bigger.
Can you see that now?
No, now it's disappeared. We had it a second ago.
Great. Okay, let me try.
I think just share it again. But if you want to have it go full screen, that way the images will fill everything up.
Let's see. Yeah. So, can you see that now?
No.
Nope.
User errors.
That's okay. Do you have 2 screens or do you only have 1 screen?
Actually, I'll go like that. Can you see this screen?
No, we're still not yet. However you were doing it before was okay. I think you just needed to have the PowerPoint go full screen.
Chad and I are restoration experts.
Oh,
not Zoom.
No.
So if you hit the share button, if you're in Zoom, just look for the share button down at the bottom there.
Yeah, I just lost my main here. Great. Sorry, everybody.
John, do you have the
No worries.
do you have the slideshow that you could share? Because I think we did. You sent it here, or Sarah, did you have that?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's see if this will entire screen. Oh, come on. Let's go. Share this.
There you
Let's
go.
see. Okay. Are we getting
Yep,
somewhere?
so-
We good here?
Yeah,
There you go.
absolutely. Now, John, do you want to walk him through putting a?
There you go.
There,
You got it.
perfect.
Yes.
Switch now? Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yay.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll go back Kauai, NWR, northwestern Hawaiian main islands there, and then that's in the Hawaiian archipelago. Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge is on the northern section of Kauai, so that's just kind of to show you what's going on there. So, like I said, flying species like birds and bats and large insects were the main species that were able to get to the islands, plus also a lot of plant species, probably with a lot of these birds too. So we kind of moved through that. So since human arrival, 71 bird species have become extinct, and 31 more federally listed as threatened or endangered. Of these, 10 have not been seen in as long as 40 years and maybe extinct. Out of 21 left, 5 are water birds. So we start with the aleula, the Hawaiian moorhen, endangered. The ai'o, the Hawaiian stilt, endangered. The ale keokeo, the Hawaiian coot, endangered. The nene, Hawaiian goose, is, I think it's actually been changed to threatened now. And the koloa maoli, the Hawaiian duck, also endangered. So, little story. Well, here's some of the breeding seasons that you see some of these Hawaiian birds. So you don't have a peak breeding season like you have migratory waterfowl or shorebirds. You can kind of see where they have a kind of a constant breeding season. The nene and the stilt, that you can kind of range their breeding season, but it's always kind of skewed sometimes. And then like the ducks, the Hawaiian coots, and the moorhens are just kind of like, you have some peaks, but they can nest all year round. What I kind of feel is that they can nest all year round if you're providing them the right habitats to be able to do that, which is really cool with endangered species, because then you can kind of boost their numbers pretty quickly if you have really good habitats. So that's kind of the basis of this, is that trying to get put on the landscape and understanding it. So, you know, so you have to kind of sit back and say, okay, what factors have played the largest role in this declines of Hawaiian water birds? So a lot of it is alteration of natural water sources. So stream diversions from, you know, upper stream systems to divert to other sides of islands and stuff like that. Ditching of wetlands for agricultural use, and then also like pumping of wetlands for agricultural use and other things like that. So another loss of habitat is early agricultural methods. You know, sugarcane agriculture was almost a scorched earth type of situation where, you know, they were taking out every tree they can find so they can plant sugarcane. And the other pictures here, you can see tourism development. You know, that's Waikiki right there in that one picture. That's a great old wetland system back there. You actually can see the Hawaiian Royal Hotel right there. So, you know, now you see no remnants of that within Waikiki or any places like that in Oahu. So another part, big part, is introduction of introduced species. So feral species like cats, rats, dogs, owls, pigs, egrets, you name it, all kinds of stuff. Invasive species, and as far as plant species, you know, California grass, paspalum, guinea grass, mangrove, how, bulrush, it's just endless. There's new ones every year, every month almost, it seems like. And then diseases for you know, a lot of these water birds. The water birds have been getting hit pretty hard with diseases such as botulism. I don't know if that's due to climate change and things like that, but it continues to be persistent in some agricultural sites on the refuge. So we kind of look at habitats through the 20th century. You know, what kind of habitats were there in the Hawaiian Islands? You know, what was left and what was put in place. So, you know, there weren't a lot of natural wetlands. There are some natural wetland systems that probably in some brackish territory or areas like that people can develop on or anything like that. But then you have areas like this. The first photo is agricultural reservoirs. So, you know, it's habitat, but it's not prime habitat, obviously. It's just, you know, a lot of water sitting for agriculture. Then You have drainage ditches and agricultural ditches, irrigation ditches. You know, those are the spots that birds would have to utilize. Other places like settling, water settling or settling for cane area. You know, there was birds listed in those areas. Those were old bird counts of birds. You know, those were sites that people went to see endangered birds around these settling basins for sugarcane. Other areas, some of these birds probably pushed up into, you know, river systems, you know, not super adequate habitats for, you know, dabbling duck or something like that. Then you also have things like, you know, monotypic agriculture that, you know, it's there, but it's not, you know, it doesn't provide all these life history requirements that we're going to be talking about. And also like ephemeral ponds and lakes and other islands, you know, seasonal ponds and lakes. So we go to Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge. So Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1972 under the Endangered Species Act to conserve the 3 endangered water birds that I talked about earlier that rely on Hanalei Valley for nesting and feeding habitats. Leased taro farming continued on the refuge to support water birds, while the focal species being the Koloa Maui, the Hawaiian duck. So prior to myself getting to this refuge, this is a picture probably in the 70s or 80s. You can kind of see where you have a lot of agricultural units, and then you have some wetland units on the left side. You see 3 big units. So wetland management consisted of mowing California grass, then flooding to an overly high level. The mindset seemed to be mimicking a pre-breeding foraging requirement. So it's birds flying south paradigm. So that's kind of a mainland thought process where you weren't thinking of the whole where you were kind of thing. So what was missing is a lot of this nesting and brood rearing. So as we look at, you know, migratory birds, so a lot of their life history requirements is nesting, brood rearing, pre-breeding, and foraging. So life history requirements for these migratory birds in North America are fulfilled over thousands of miles from each other. Where the Hawaiian Islands, the water birds need proper wetland habitats to fulfill their life history requirements. But these requirements are needed to be fulfilled in a very small area. So that shows, you know, you could have a small wetland and have a dense amount of birds on that site, on that wetland. And you can sit there and, oh, you guys only have these small little wetlands, but we're harboring a percentage of a population. We've had sites that were 3 acres large, and you held 400 koloa on that site. You have 20% of that population on 3 acres. That's mind-blowing. So understanding the water birds and life history requirements. So we keep going after this life history requirement. This is a very important part of understanding what's going on here. So that everybody had to step back and kind of think about, okay, how do we do this? So what was needed? It was obvious that diverse wetland plant regimes. That is what was needed. The plants are the driver for these birds. I've always said, this is the driver. People look at water and this and that. When I look at what's going to be a driver for birds, it's the plants and understanding those plants. So bring that idea to the ground. So California grass became the predominant plant species throughout the refuge. It was used as grazed feed and stuff like that, where California grass, if you know it, it's reed canary grass on steroids. It grows actually 5 to 6 feet high, and then it will actually grow 20 feet to 30 feet horizontally. So also to help with this is if you look at the weather patterns in Hanalei or in Hawaii, you don't see much temperature fluctuation, and you see a lot of very constant rainfall constantly. So there's a lot going on there but it's also, you have to look at the good side. Hey, this is great for managing wetlands if you have the right plants. So kind of going through the refuge at the time, understanding, okay, what plants do we have on this? We had like 31 plant species that we found on the refuge throughout different areas. The primary focus is on 4 beneficial and 3 harmful species. So the beneficial species were things like Fimbricelus, Cyparises, Ludwigias, and millets, where the harmful species were more like the California grass, Pespalums, and Guinea grass. So how do we understand what plants are important to these birds for the life history requirements? So criteria of desirable plants. So these plants need seed production, energy, seed production through having energy and proteins. Structure, the foundation of plants to support nesting. Cover, the ability to camouflage, conceal, protect from the weather. Roosting, accommodating loafing and social activities is very important. And nesting material, abundance near the nest, less energy consumed. And then breakdown, the ability to decompose while flooded is really important for invertebrate life cycles also. So the ability to provide those invertebrate life cycles for those birds for the feeding of that. So then the other part, criteria of understanding, you know, the undesirable plants. So the breakdown, okay, so what's really important to me is if it doesn't break down. So things like California's, they don't break down. They continue to take over a wetland unit. So not able to provide invertebrate cycles, and the plants can thrive while flooded. So the other part is aggressiveness, the speed and expansion of growth. So some of these plants out here, those types of species like California grass, it can grow 6 inches a day. And that's just amazing, especially in Hanalei where it's prime growing all the time. So the other big thing is maintenance, the amount of time, fuel, pesticides, and money it takes to get all these things squared away. So those were really big desirable factors that I needed to understand. So I started putting little scoring numbers on this. So what is a positive scoring attribute? So roosting, like you see there, roosting areas, structure for nests and things like that. So these structure through Ludwigia, the breakdown to start that invertebrate cycle throughout a few successions or through a few years of a wetland cycle, cover to conceal these birds, nesting materials, and seed production. So these are all positive one attribute. So the plant scoring for a negative. So no breakdown, like I said, the aggressiveness, and then the maintenance again. That's a lot to be maintaining, I mean, out there. So let's just give an example of a plant that we thought was very desirable, and that was the millet. So seed production, yes. Nesting material, yes. Breakdown, yes. Cover, yes. Structure, yes. And roosting, yes. So that cleared. I did not have any negative attributes for that plant. So it's a great plant. I totaled it at 6. But there was one side of that I don't want to have a monotypic situation with just millet also. So that's when you get into some of the other techniques of managing wetlands. So let's look at California grass as far as the total. Seed production, 1. There's some seed production, birds will feed on it. Nesting material in some situations, it'll take it. Cover, it's there. So the negatives, again, breakdown, aggressiveness, extremely aggressive, lots of time and money into maintenance. So it scored 0. So, you know, how do we get to this? We talked about, I like to talk about a 50-year layer where that California grass had basically been given 50 years to basically take everything over in some way, shape, or form. So how do we attack this? We need to get through that 50-year layer. There's just tons and tons of, you know, duff layer that we need to get to. So how do we get the plants that we really want? So it's getting to that EMS, exposed mineral soils. So, you know, utilizing, you know, our discs and getting newer discs and getting better equipment, getting, you know, dry tillers, getting wet tillers, and then utilizing flood regimes where we'd flood for 3 months just to, you know, break everything down, and doing all these things and understanding the system and breaking down the soils more and more and more, instead of just doing like 3-disc run and then put water on it. We started breaking it down more and more and more. And we really started seeing some really neat things. So it started to go to where areas were complete California grass, where we started seeing things like this. This is all from restless. This is great. So it's the germination stage to the vegetative stage, to a vegetation response. And then that's when we're going to start doing our flood-ins. And then it went to bird response. It was just awesome to see. We started seeing the bird numbers on the refuge just go up tremendously. So we obviously knew something was right and something was happening, but we still needed, okay, that was the first part, is understanding the driver, which is the vegetation, of course. So now we need to understand, how do we utilize these ponds in different ways to take care of all these life history requirements for 5 birds? It's crazy. So the focus was to provide a wetland management program that could capture all life history requirements for 5 endangered birds through nesting periods through 3 transitional phases. So over time, you can see how a wetland utilizes, you know, water manipulation and how it grows and expands, and then it decomposes again. And it's really cool to watch wetlands do that. So one of the first flood up stages that we would do is that we call it our phase 1, our pre-breeding, or things for like where Koloas could get a lot of, you know, good materials and good proteins to start nesting or something around that time that they needed it or whatever. So, and then it was really good for moorhens to transition through that transition. Moorhens like to try to transition through Koloa's stages, which is really neat to watch. But so Koloa, ideally, we wanted to feed Koloa on that point. And so, you know, a lot of it, you know, shallow flood-ins, and then a lot of that stuff is you're going to start breaking down some of these finer sedges and fimbriculus. That's going to, you know, so you're going to always kind of have, you move into this next stage where you're going to have some of that broken down, and now you're going to have a little more robust wetland at this point. So that's where the moorhens and coots start coming in for nesting. And that's the idea of, okay, perfect. This is where they're going to be nesting. Koloa can still utilize this with a lot of other areas. And then also the stilts a little bit, you know, not so much, but, you know, you're kind of seeing how you're transitioning birds through their life histories through different ponds, which is really cool to see. And then like some of these later stage ponds where we started finding out that Koloa were actually molting inside some of these older, you know, broken down ponds during the right time of year. And it's good because they weren't leaving the refuge where they were going up into the river systems where, you know, there wasn't any predator control or anything like that. So they were hunkering down into these wetlands, which was like, this is great. They're staying in this system. So in this, you know, you'd also see moorhens and coots nesting and stuff like that, still to be opportunistic on drawdowns or something like that. But you can kind of see how we're trying to give all these birds different things. You'll see it in the next slide. And then we talk about a maintenance, you know, our maintenance part of this, where we'd be maintaining, going back to bare mineral soils. But now, after working the systems for so many years, that we started seeing that, hey, we can utilize a pond and we can utilize flooding to break it down to exactly where we want it when it comes to stilt season. And it's like, we don't have to do anything. So that was a really cool thing also to start seeing that, you know, all that work paying off, and where wetland units were kind of regenerating. And the ultimate goal was to have it to where, you know, these ponds can regenerate themselves. It's a matter of just turning the water on and then turning it off. But the second is once you have invasive species getting back involved and all those vectors coming in, you have to treat them right away and get in there. So if you look at this system, this is back when we had a 2-year cycle. Now the wetland systems are kind of in like a 3-year cycle, which is really neat. So when we were really aggressively going after this and turning over ponds, you know, this is a 60-acre unit that we had at Hanalei. And this is kind of how, in my mind, this is how it needed to run. So you can see over a 2-year cycle, look at the changes that are moving through that. And think about how birds move through that, through their life history. So that's just what's really cool to kind of look at. And now that's kind of changed now because we've got kind of a 3-year cycle. Yeah, every wetland has a different cycle. A wetland could have a 50-year cycle. A wetland could have, you know, a 5, a 10, or whatever. But what's so unique about these wetland systems is that they're so short-lived because of invasive species that you always have to go in there and you know, take care of it. This is a very, you know, flood-prone area that brings in a lot of vectors constantly. So you're always managing that and maintaining that. But, you know, it's obviously not, it's an extremely modified system. So that's the other part of it, is having, you know, having to run this refuge and work on, you know, how to move birds around and constantly stay ahead of these things. It's mind-boggling. It's extremely hard to do. So some of the things that people ask me, they're like, what are the keys to success in Hawaii for wetlands? And so I always talk about, you know, you need to have the right equipment for the jobs. You know, a lot of people will buy this big fancy tractor and this big fancy disc, and you know what? It doesn't get you 10 feet out there because you're wet all the time. So you need to understand what type of tractors you need, what type of mower decks you need, and what type of disc. That's the most important, is discs, is understanding that and knowing that you can buy a lighter disc. It's not a big deal, and you're going to get a lot farther with it than getting this big, heavy, spec'd out disc usually. So things like that, and the proper infrastructure, building your infrastructure properly so you can utilize it, you know, and its efficiency, like I say at the bottom. So water delivery, water control systems, properly graded impoundment. What I found was the properly graded impoundments was, I talk about a 3-inch minus, a 3-inch plus. And basically that's a fluctuation between 6 inches within my wetland units. If you went over that mark And the way you want to manage water, it could cause problems where you will see invasive species on it. So that was kind of my mark on how I kind of graded wetland units. So the other big things are, you know, the ability to adapt. So being flexible and don't get stuck on one thing. That's the thing. A lot of times people want to get stuck on one thing and they just can't get past that. Understand how to move around it, and then it will come to you in a different way if you know, keep moving. Always be thinking 2 weeks in advance. That's always constant in Hawaii. People think it's sunny every day. It's not. It rains every day. It's sunny every day. You have to understand how to work around that. Learning from your mistakes. I think everybody knows that rule. And then the other one is don't be afraid to try things. That is the biggest failure, I think, in a lot of ways people look at things. You need to learn from your mistakes. You need to at least get out there and understand it. Don't make a huge epic mistake, but make nice little mistakes and then learn from them. And then on top of that, it's efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Understanding how to be efficient, because in Hawaii, one person could probably only maintain maybe 70 to 60 acres of wetlands properly. And that's the hard part, is, you know, staffing and getting enough people to be able to manage these wetlands properly. It's so different compared to some places in the mainland. So that's kind of my quick thing. I just realized that I didn't explain, you know, how many years I had been working on this. I worked in this. I started out as an intern for $25 a day. I ended up working my career for 20 years in Hanalei, and just being exposed to just wetlands 24/7. I probably have, some people have said that I have more wetland experience because of more turnovers than I've had than anybody in the country, because I was turning over wetlands so often, and for, you know, so many things that, you know, I have a lot of background in a small place in a 20-year period. I mean, I don't know how many wetlands I've turned over. It's unbelievable. But basically that's it. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to kind of go over this with everybody, and we'll see if there's any questions in the comments here. So thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, both of you guys, for just a couple of outstanding presentations. And having had the opportunity to be with, well, with Chad most recently, seeing you at work in your environment is, you know, really inspiring, and the depth of your learning over those, you know, those 20 years is extraordinary. Wonderful. And Blaise, many years we've worked together. Thank you as well. Those are wonderful presentations. You know, a lot of depth there, a lot of complexity in both of those environments. What I'm going to do for just a few minutes here is just share a few of the learning resources that our center has created that relate to these environments. And these are learning resources that teachers can use. They're all free. They're on the web, but they're also, you know, anybody who's interested in these topics, I think there's a lot to learn. And as I was just struck again by, in both those presentations, the complexity and the richness of the complexity of those environments, the, you know, the depth of understanding it requires to really make an impact there in the work that both of you are doing. And, you know, one of the challenges, if you're trying to create learning resources about topics like this that, you know, are usable to the, you know, a lay public or K-12 teachers or students who, you know, have no depth of knowledge on these topics. The challenge is, you know, how do you tell this story in a way that's accessible, that doesn't, you know, hopefully oversimplify things, but makes it comprehensible and provides some context for understanding. So that's something our center, I think, we really focus on a lot, you know, working with people with deep understanding and knowledge, content experts, and then finding ways of using visualizations and multimedia storytelling to make those stories accessible. So what you're seeing right now is one of our major programs, Waters to the Sea Mississippi River Adventure. So I'll touch quickly on some of the resources we have that relate to what Blaise was talking about in the Delta. This Waters to the Sea program really is about the entire river from the headwaters to the Gulf, all 2,300 miles or so. This is the introductory screen that you see when you come here. I'm going to put in the chat links to all of these programs, and I'll do that right now. And we'll also send this out to everybody, so you'll get a chance to see, you'll get this if you don't catch these links right now, but I did just put it in the chat. So Waters to Sea Mississippi Adventure, this is the intro screen. And so we have introductory modules on what is the water cycle, what is a watershed, some of the stuff Blaise was talking about at the beginning of his talk. And then the tabs across the top, this next one over, river map, I'll click that. And that opens up an interactive map of the entire Mississippi corridor. And you can see these little green dots along the river. And each of those is a place-based story or a module about that location. So I'm going to zoom in on the Delta. I'm just double clicking here. And as I zoom in 3 times, all of a sudden, we're going to be able to see all the tributaries of the Mississippi will start to show up. If I go in a couple more clicks, I start to see the counties, or in Louisiana, they're called parishes. So I'm going to zoom in to show you one of the projects that we've profiled that relates closely to some of the things that Blaise was talking about. So here we are, the Mississippi River. The Mr. Go, he was talking about the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, is on the right-hand side here. This is a wetland area called Carnarvon. And we've created a little learning module about this particular location. And now that I've clicked on it, anytime you click on one of those green dots, you zoom into a focused area of the map. So this is the Carnarvon area here, and there's an interactive that you can access on the left side. I'll click that quickly. And this opens up a 3-part learning experience that's focused on this idea of a strategy that's being employed to bring back wetland environments in this Carnarvon diversion. So there's an introductory video that gives a little background and orientation, and then 3 or 4 images through time. And so these are all exactly the same place from the same vantage point, but at different times. So the one on the left, 1989, the one on the right is 2019. Mississippi River is at the top. There's a little channel here that connects the river through a siphon, which is a way of enabling water from the river to enter this channel here. And that channel then opens up into this Big Mar wetland, which historically was a rich wetland, but due to the same kinds of impacts that Blaise was talking about, saltwater intrusion and so forth, all of the wetland vegetation had died, and it was essentially an open pond. But in 1989, diversions were started of bringing fresh water in from the Mississippi. So the salt water, the salinity in the wetland is knocked down, and sediment is brought in as well, because the river is what's carrying the sediment that's required to replenish these wetlands. So you can see over time how the wetland has been restored in the course of those years. And then the other piece we have, which is a fun piece, is a 360 video that we shot in this airboat. So this is a 360 video. I'm navigating the video with my mouse, and everything you see in this image, all of the emergent grasses there coming out of the wetland and the trees in the background, is all there as a result of this project of diverting the sediment rich waters from the Mississippi. So this is one of our 360 videos, one of the strategies we use to give people an immersive experience of a particular place and to help them understand a process like this. So I will stop that. Tons of stuff in this Mississippi River Adventure, probably 6 hours of content. The tabs across the top allow you to pick topics based on subject areas. There's educator resources. We have all this content integrated with with the NGSS, science standards, and so forth. So that's all I'm going to say about this big resource. Plenty of stuff to explore there. And then we've created a version of this for Kauai as well. So it looks very similar, and it is a very similar structure to it. And we are in the process of creating more content about Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge, working with Jennifer Waipa, who I think is with us on this call, and a quick shout out to her and her support. So right now we don't have a lot of stuff yet about the Hanalei wetlands that Chad was sharing, but that is going to be added here. So this is again a resource that has rich content, kind of natural and cultural heritage of the island of Kauai that we've developed over many years here. So wanted to show you that. And then also, this is another program we are creating. This is our a program we have designed for very large touchscreen kiosks that we have at Kilauea Point, which is one of the 3 national wildlife refuges on the island of Kauai. Hanalei being one of them that Chad was focusing on, Kilauea Point being a second one, and Huleia is the third one. So we're building out these learning programs that are playing in these kiosks. This is also playing on the web. You can see there's content about birds of the sea, about marine creatures, the history of this spectacular, the Kilauea Point is a spectacular location with a historic lighthouse. And so this is one way we're going to be sharing this content in these kiosks that are in place on the island of Kauai. But you can also access this on the web, and I did include the link to that. And finally, I'm going to share one of the videos that we are creating that is part of this project of building out our learning resources about the National Wildlife Refuge Complex on Kauai. And this is, Chad made a brief mention of this as one of the issues that impacts the 5 endangered species that he has been working with is botulism. And this is a short video, it's about 2 minutes long, that highlights how dogs are being used to help address this issue. And Kim Rogers is the featured person in this video, and I believe she's with us as well. So a quick shout out to you. Thank you so much for your support. So I'm going to play this briefly. It's 2 minutes long, and then that'll be the end of my piece, and we will welcome your questions at that point. So here's a little piece on the detector dogs of Hanalei.
There are 5 endangered water birds that make their home here at Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge. There's the nene, which is our state bird. There is the koloa maoli, also known as the Hawaiian duck. There's the alaiula, also known as the gallinule or a moorhen. Alai keo keo, which is a coot. And our last is a stilt, which is known as the io. So one of the biggest threats we have here at Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge to our endangered native water bird is avian botulism. Avian botulism is a toxin that is found naturally occurring in soil across the world. There can be concentrations of it that are basically like food poisoning to our native and endangered water birds. It is a paralytic disease, so it will paralyze them in a very short time unless they are found and delivered an antitoxin, they perish. Once a bird has been infected, they are now a host. And if insects come in and feed off that carcass, all of those insects are now hot. You know, they've now been infected. And insects are the source of food for many of our water birds here. So another water bird comes along, eats that hot insect, and it only takes a couple and they can die of the disease. So the idea is to get them out of the environment as soon as possible so this doesn't set in. So now where we are with the program is we have recently started, within about the last year, a volunteer-led dog handler team to find sick and dying birds. It's proving really successful. we're working with a dog, typically they're on a leash, they're like 6 feet in front of us. We'll try to do the entire circumference of each loey. And then when a dog gets on scent, when they've picked up their target odor, it's really clear and easy to tell when they've got the scent. You know, they'll start to pull a little harder on the leash. They're a little more determined, their body language, you can see it. Some dogs, it's like their tail goes up, you know, so there's cues that the dogs give us. You know, we reward these dogs with treats because we keep them motivated to keep wanting to find the next carcass.
And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Tracy, I think, if you're ready to take some questions or.
Yes, well, we're going to take just a few. We have with two presenters. It's always lasts a little long. I mean, it's where we want to be, but we aren't going to take a lot of questions because I like to have people, be able to, keep moving on and do the other things I need to do in the evening. So here's a question for Blaise. The mangrove cylinders appear to be conical in shape, like used for oak seedlings. The question is, do mangroves have a deep taproot?
Yeah, I mean, those are just regular tree pots, that you would normally use. But yeah, the whole idea of a taproot, like, I don't know, some people talk about oaks having deep taproots, but the taproot only goes like a foot or less in a lot of species, and then they start to grow outward from that. This is just, you're basically just trying to occupy it with a space for a year and a half to where it can take a dip in the temperatures in the cold weather.
Then there's a question about Bayou Gentili. What's the soil depth content now? Just, I guess, just some questions about I think you were talking about the depth of it, but what, if that's a clear question, what is the depth, soil depth of Bayou Gentili now?
Are they asking for the depth of the water in the bayou?
Maybe more the water depth. Yes, that was the second rephrasing of the question. Maybe the water depth rather than the soil depth.
Well, yeah, most of Bayou Gentili is silted in on that part of it. There's also, if you follow it back, it goes into the city of New Orleans, and it's actually Gentili Ridge or Gentili Highway. So a lot of our bayous, one time they had water flowing through them, like Metairie Bayou and Gentili Bayou, and then they became roadways and were all the way paved over. So they might actually just be like a drainage ditch underneath a road. And Bayou Gentili is pretty tortured little bayou.
All right, and one final question. Do you use tree tubes for all the cypress seedlings that you plant?
No, the ones that you saw on the boat there are like 1 gallon pots, and there's different techniques. Like if you're growing from seed, you would, or wait, are you guys asking about the pots, or are you asking about the protectors?
Tree tubes are using.
Let me go through both of them. If you're growing from seed, you're using the tree pots, they're Stewie and Sons D pots. They're the longer ones that were shown there for the mangroves. With the cypress seedlings, if you're taking one from a cutting and you're putting in a pot, you can do that in a 1 gallon kind of regular round pot. All of our cypress trees that we plant, we have to put those protectors on to keep nutria and rabbits from gnawing and girdling the bottom of the tree.
Got it. We're going to move to Hanalei now, and Maka'ala, I probably have mispronounced that, as I can barely pronounce English words, is the executive director of a nonprofit that is over in Hanalei, and mentioned that the Hanalei River is 16 miles long and 8 of those miles are vertical. So we've got a little information, and it is one of the 14 American heritage rivers, which is a pretty cool thing. One of the questions is for Chad is not so much about the wetland, but about, is there a place that you have shared your knowledge? For new land managers, especially small nonprofits, is there a place where you can access the details of your experience in wetland management techniques?
Right up here.
Okay.
No, right now I'm working with Lee Frederickson and Adanya Henry. We're trying to, I just was down in Hawaii last week and I worked with Adanya. We're trying to finish up a lot of interesting things for a handbook for wetland management in Hawaii and tropical wetlands. So nothing happens quickly. So we're hoping we can get that done eventually within the next year or so. Adanya's really wanting to get this squared away. So we are definitely working forward towards that. But, there's a lot more involved, a lot of techniques, and, it's a lot of, I'll be working with the islands for years and years to come for sure, even though I'm not there now, but I'm definitely not opposed to coming back one day and trying to work on that eventually again. So yes, hopefully a handbook within the next year.
Good. Well, we would love to help with visualizing or engaging if that can be of any use, because there are many ways to educate and engage, of course. So we'd love to do that. I have a question that was kind of built. Kathleen sent a question, or kind of a comment just about the 80s and 90s when she was working with the ponds and the challenges of imposing a mainland style management to Hanalei. I want to know where you're at right now. I know we last talked when we saw you in May. I think you were getting ready to go and you made the move, but you're on the mainland on the West Coast. And what have you learned and how are you applying it in your new situation? So it's a little bit backwards reversing. And what have you learned in Hawaii that you have to relearn and think differently now that you're on the mainland?
Well, the only thing is I can't really answer that question because I haven't gone through a whole cycle yet here in the mainland. It's at least through that. So it'd be hard for me to make a really good, determination between the two. But there's a lot of different species up here that you have to manage for also. You have mammalians and other things and, all the way to turtles and fish and all types of stuff. So it's definitely complex, but it's not as, intense as like Hawaii wetlands. So it's very different. And I've always said that, you have to be as aggressive as the situation you're in. And, being in Hawaii wetlands, they are very aggressive. The invasive species are very aggressive. So you have to be just as aggressive as they are. And that's hard to do with, limited funding, limited people. And that's kind of the thing that I've always kind of tried to press, and that's something that we've talked about in that handbook that we're having come out too. So I don't think I answered your whole question. Maybe in a year I could answer that question properly, but yeah, that's just kind of the things that, working in Hawaii, it's not all fun and sun, and it's a lot of down and dirty work, really. You have to have a lot of passion, lots and lots of passion to do your job there, and a lot of people do in Hawaii for sure. So yep.
Hey, Chad, I thought it was one thing I definitely connected with you on was making small mistakes constantly and learning from those. That's something I know one of my slides I was talking about mangroves and where we put them, and those are literally me trying to test in different spots and finally figuring out where it worked. But where do you work now?
I'm in Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge in Washington. So I'm out there now, and they're very well established in their systems. The thing about Hanalei and Hawaii is that there's not a lot of literature on management there, and so a lot of that stuff it was a lot of people just pushed me and said, hey, keep learning this stuff, learn this stuff. So it was a really good opportunity to be in for sure, and I don't ever regret doing what I did there and learning the systems, and hopefully that can be this book and kind of that knowledge can be pushed forward for many generations to come, I hope. So I'm hoping that happens. So but I've got to learn some stuff up here, and I need to expand my knowledge and understand things for the future too. So that was something that I really had to really think about, and this was the right move at the time. So I definitely will learn a lot more, and hopefully help apply that to, things in Hawaii in the future, I hope. So, yeah.
Well, excellent. It sounds like your wife is just coming in today and some of the family's coming over. So you've got to, we'll let you get going so you can welcome your other dog in and the family. And that's a lot of change happening. So good luck with all of that. Appreciate your
Yes,
hard work.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, we've got a lot of thanks in the chat, a lot of appreciation from the folks who were part of this. I really enjoyed thinking about the two different locations and the similarities and some of the differences that are there. And what I want to say, of course, is the passion of Chad and Blaise and all the other folks that are doing hard work out there is a real driver. And hopefully we can all work to get the young people in society to want to do more to conserve and preserve the natural environment. So I know that what's one of our goals to get educators to engage and to celebrate the beauty that's out there. And we've been able to get out there to these marvelous places with both of you. And I am totally appreciative of that, just for my own personal fun and just enjoying the great things that are out there, not always just worrying about losing them, but we have to take the time to enjoy them as well. So a marvelous presentation to both of you. And with that, I think we can start to say goodbye. Thank you very much. Oh, Sarah, you might want to go through the continuing education credits and a few of the details. So Sarah, I'll let you take this out. And the next week, we are starting the Virtual Rivers Institute. 5 nights where you get to hear more of Blaise and other folks. We've got a real marvelous experience to go deeper on the Mississippi River, one river thinking from the headwaters to the Delta. So with that, Sarah, why don't you give a little more details about that for folks?
Yeah, so we've got the River Institute coming up next week, starting on the 11th. If you want to, for tonight, to get 1.5 CEUs for this evening, you can go ahead and type in this tiny URL. I'll send it out with the recording as well later this week. We've got a hiatus in our lineup for the webinar series because of the Institute. So we won't be back until March 1st, and that will be the Barrier Islands virtual tour with Jacqueline Richard, who is a good colleague and friend that has a lot of amazing geological information to share. But yeah, I think otherwise, let us know if you have any questions and look for the email follow-up from us.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.